Okay, before we begin, I am very much aware that greatest demo of all time is a pretty bold claim. There's a lot of different aspects to a demo that could be taken into account when looking at how good they are, and if I was to cover every demo in existence, I would no doubt find one that does some of those things better. There's the obvious go-to thing being that the demo needs to be a fun vertical slice of everything the main game has to offer, showing a little bit of every single layer to the game. And for that we have tons of examples via stuff like the old PC shareware scene with stuff like Doom, or the original RE4 demo, which had the whole village and Dr. Salvador sequence. Not to mention things like the Metal Gear Solid 2 tanker demo, which was not only a good demonstration of the game, but also helped push Kojima's trick into making players believe that Snake was the main character. And you also have a few examples of games that take things a couple of steps further, like with Dead Rising 2 Case Zero, which technically isn't a demo as it was its own paid-for thing, but it was still designed to be a vertical slice of the game that demonstrated what the full release would be like, with the key difference being that Case Zero takes place before the main game and has its own entirely original setting and level. And if we look at some more modern examples of demos, we can find a whole bunch of ones that really push the boat out to make them more enticing. Various RPGs like Dragon Quest XI having demos that arguably take 10 or so hours to get through and even let you transfer your save file over to the main game, meaning that you can still get a very good taste of what's to come, and then still pick up right where you left off if you decide to pick up the full game. And if it was just that we were rating, nothing would beat Yakuza Kiwami 2's demo due to there being an incredible blunder on Sega of America's part, being that the demo basically just had the entire game for free, as the blocker that stops you from progressing past Chapter 2 just wasn't implemented correctly. Finally, even if there isn't a direct save transfer to the main game, many newer demos these days will have some sort of bonus that you unlock after playing it. These tend to be pretty minor and frivolous, but at the end of the day, any little bonus extra thing you can get is always appreciated. But what makes the Bravely Second Ballad of the Three Cavaliers demo so good isn't that it's necessarily better in any of these areas than the games that I mentioned, but for the fact that it does all of these things and more at the same time, to the point that I'd argue that it's mandatory to go through before doing a normal playthrough of the game. For people wondering what the hell is Bravely Second, it is a direct sequel to the hit 3DS JRPG Bravely Default, which was a homage to classic Final Fantasy and took most of its inspiration from FF5, innovating and expanding on that game's job system, whilst also daring to ask the question, what if the Pope was sexy? What is important to remember is that Bravely Second should not be confused with Bravely Default 2 for the Nintendo Switch, which is more of a mechanical sequel still using the Brave and Default systems that the original did. What makes Bravely Second so special is that because it is a direct follow-up to a game that focuses on faithfully recreating the magic of classic Final Fantasy, Bravely Second gets to twist and play around with those classic design and story tropes in a lot of different fun ways. There can be this small disconnect with how silly the game can get in general, with all of this world-ending stuff happening when characters are just kind of goofing off, meaning that when it does get to be a bit more serious, it tends to all just fall a little bit flat, particularly the game's villains. But it's still an incredibly fun and charming adventure, and the gameplay has seen huge improvements over the first one, with a bunch of brand new job classes that are interesting alternatives to pre-existing ones within the Final Fantasy franchise. You still have staples like black mages, thieves and monks etc, but you also have classes like wizards that only have magic concepts like heat and frost, instead of stuff like Blizzaraga or something. The difference is you can apply modifiers to these spells with stuff like Mist that will make sure that it will hit every enemy multiple times at the end of each next turn, or Hammer, which will make the spell scale with physical attack instead. Another example is Charioteer, which starts off every fight fairly average, only having C rank proficiency in every weapon type, but will rank up for every normal attack they use within that fight, meaning in any fight that lasts more than a couple of turns, you can turn them into a physical powerhouse who's able to sacrifice their armor slots to quad wield 4 weapons that they can just shred the boss with. Overall, Bravely Second is a wonderful game that I'm very confused about as to why the developers felt the need to apologize for it. It's inventive, it's fun, and it doesn't have the drawn-out boss rush section the original did. And other than a kind of wonky localization due to Nintendo Treehouse usurping the translation rights, it pretty much has no real blemishes in my opinion. Seriously though, why the fuck did they change the Necromancer job class to Catmancer? It completely kills the pun for absolutely no reason. And the, oh, but Neko doesn't mean anything in English argument really doesn't have a foot to stand on because they still call the giant snakes Orochi, so that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And while I'm on it, there's the whole side quest thing with Adia, where you have different choices that you can make and that will unlock different job classes. But for whatever reason, Nintendo cut out all of the bad and good endings, so you only get normal, neutral outcomes out of everything, and it doesn't make any sense. So the next question is, what makes the Bravely Second demo in particular the greatest demo of all time? Well, first of all we can start with the fact that it is a wholly unique 5 to 10 hour prequel chapter to the main game that does everything it sets out to do, giving you a taste of what the full experience has to offer. A similar thing was also done with the demo for the original Bravely Default, however, that one felt a little bit jarring as it was a sort of side story that took place between chapters 2 and 3, and because of that it kinda just throws you into the middle of things and isn't very good for introducing the characters to you. But pretty much everything I'm gonna say about the gameplay side of things probably applies to the original Bravely Default demo as well. The demo starts you off with multiple job classes unlocked right off the bat, some new and others returning from the previous game, and with the demo's inflated XP and job point rate, it means that you can unlock a ton of different abilities from each one of these classes and start mixing and matching them very quickly. This is very important since the core of the Bravely series' gameplay, like Final Fantasy V before it, revolves around your party's build potential and what combinations of job classes and abilities you can create for your team to make them absolutely broken. Something I did in the first game was joining Dark Knight and Spellblade together, which allowed me to enchant my attacks with Drain Magic, resulting in the Dark Knight's high damage skills that would usually cost HP to cast would just heal me instead. And while you can't do that specifically in the Bravely Second demo, you can start making some interesting combinations quite quickly. What makes this work especially well as a taster before the main game is it leans into the game design concept of abilities, in which the game starts off showing you what a mid or end game character might look like before stripping it all away from you and making you work to earn it back. And with Bravely Second being an RPG that tends to stretch out over a fairly long period of time compared to other games, it's really useful to get full reign over the job system for a few hours before you start the main game, so you're already building towards a particularly good character setup, instead of just randomly giving your party whatever jobs seem right at the time. However, what really makes the demo shine in my opinion is what it brings to the narrative and story. Bravely Default had 4 main characters, being Tiz, Onyes, Ringabel, and Best Girl Adia. And Bravely Second only brings 2 of these back as party members whilst introducing 2 new characters in Yu and Magnolia. And so the Ballad of the Three Cavaliers demo is able to show off these 2 characters a little bit and introduce them to players both new and old before the main story. It isn't them who makes this demo such a good narrative supplement to the main game, however, it's the other 2 titular characters, being Jean Angard and Nikolai Nikolonikov. These 2 characters are Yu's fellow cavaliers and are with him in the very beginning of the main Bravely Second game, but the problem is within the first hour or so, some very dramatic stuff happens that kind of explains why Yu is the only member of their little trio who's able to continue down this adventure. And with only 1 hour that has to be shared with tutorials and stuff, you don't really get much time to form any sort of emotional attachment to these characters and their bond with you. It's great for keeping the opening of the game very snappy and not keeping you bogged down with tons of exposition and stuff, but the impact of what goes on with these characters is a little bit stunted when you don't really have any time to connect with them. And this is where the demo comes in, since it is this whole 5-hour mini adventure that is pretty much dedicated to showing off the dynamic between these characters. It is arguably all just fluff and filler that does not need to be part of the main game, but it's the good kind of filler that lets you better understand characters and flesh them out with just bits of information that's not essential but stops them from feeling quite so two-dimensional. And as a result, it means the impact of those early game spoilers are going to hit much harder. It's this core aspect of what makes a good demo that Bravely Second does so well, acting as a great vertical slice to whet the appetite of anybody who plays it, but also doing it in such a fresh way, which means that steps don't need to be retread if the player decides to pick it up later. And I think that alone makes a pretty solid argument as to why it should be considered one of the best demos of all time. Luckily, however, there are quite a few little extras that I believe give it a slight edge in a few aspects. Now, for starters, like many modern games, this demo gives you a few bonus items as rewards for playing it that you can unlock in the main game. These are mostly just some extra early consumables, and in that regard it does kinda lose to Bravely Default's demo, which gives you better swords and shields to start the game with. It's all stuff that's pretty minor, and in the bigger context of everything, it's really not that impactful, but demos are designed to sell you a product just as much as they are designed to give you a taster of the art within. So in that regard, this little external incentive goes quite a long way for how nothing it technically is. Especially since at the time the demo did release a couple of weeks before the game came out, so you did have something to work towards before you got your hands on it. The quote-unquote added incentive that I think really stands out for the game though is its weird save transfer aspect though. Due to the way that the demo is designed, allowing you to get to level 20 and unlock several abilities for different job classes, there's no real way you could transfer your save data over to the main game. This is why you just get some bonus rewarded items instead. So what you actually end up transferring over is your Street Pass data, which Bravely Second uses for a weird but fairly inintrusive Facebook game that unlocks a ton of rewards as you play through the story. Essentially, the whole thing is pretty much identical to the Norende restoration minigame that was added in the final mix version of the first game, which we got by default. This time, however, you're just building up the defenses on the little moon base, which is Magnolia's home. How this works is you'll be able to put the Miis of anybody that you Street Pass with to work on constructing, upgrading, and repairing different parts of the base, which they'll do either while you're playing or leaving the game in sleep mode. And by completing these tasks, you'll be able to get access to better items in shops as well as modifiers for your special moves and a few other little bonuses. The thing is, like your typical Facebook game, the wait times on these things are pretty long and you can only reduce them by putting more Miis on the project. What the demo allows you to do is collect up to 20 Miis before you've even bought the game. You could spend 6, 7, 8, even 9 months between finishing the demo and actually purchasing the game, and you'd still be unlocking stuff during that time that could jumpstart your save file with a bunch of extras just by having the demo sitting on your 3DS. And these extras, unlike the bonus items, are actually pretty useful and make a pretty big impact on your own playthrough of the game, particularly with the end and post-game optional bosses and stuff. So that's pretty much it. Bravely Second is a wonderful game I would recommend to any fan of JRPGs, and has a great demo with both benefits to the mechanical side and the narrative side of things. But whether you're a person who played the original Bravely Default but skipped out on Second, or you're somebody who was disappointed with BD2, I 100% suggest that you go download this. I mean, it is free after all, and it should be pretty easy to quickly dip your toe into it, is what I'd like to say, but unfortunately with the 3DS and the Wii U eShops now gone forever, it's pretty elusive to try and nab, and that's while utilizing things like emulation and or hacked 3DS. Something that's surprisingly easy to do, by the way. It only takes about 30 minutes. Not as easy as hacking a Vita though. That doesn't even require a PC. But yeah, tracking down the ROM of a full game is pretty easy to do, but there's barely any sites storing demos for them, since in most cases that would be kind of redundant. And with the 3DS emulator Citra being killed alongside Yuzu, that just adds some extra steps to trying to get into 3DS emulation. There are ways around it, and it's not impossible, but it is a little bit of a pain to get sorted out. But anyway, if you're still watching, then thank you for sticking around. I just just wanted to share a little bit of the more obscure side of this already pretty niche game, since it's likely to be bordering on lost media in a few years, and I think it's really neat and shouldn't be forgotten. Who knows, maybe they'll include it when they eventually port the game to Switch and PC one day. I'm definitely not coping.